Chosen one, don't scroll past this moment. This message may be the very warning your spirit has been trying to understand. Many chosen ones expect divine guidance to come through dramatic signs, but more often it begins as a quiet feeling that something isn't right. A conversation that leaves you strangely drained, a sudden confusion after being around a certain person, or a thought about someone with the letter M that keeps returning to your mind. These subtle moments are not random. For a chosen one, they can be the first signals that something deeper is unfolding. If this message reached you, chosen one, comment "I'm in" below, and listen carefully to what comes next. A wise mentor often reminds every chosen one of something simple but powerful. Peace is rarely accidental. When life is aligned, the mind feels steady, decisions become clearer, and even challenges seem manageable. But the moment the wrong influence begins to move closer, that inner balance can start shifting in subtle ways. Many chosen ones notice this long before they understand the reason. They might feel calm during the day, yet after interacting with someone, perhaps the person whose name begins with M, their thoughts become unusually restless. It does not always look dramatic. In fact, most of the time it appears ordinary. Conversation may seem friendly on the surface, maybe even encouraging, yet when it ends, the chosen one feels slightly drained. Imagine leaving a meeting that seemed positive, but afterward you cannot focus on your plans anymore. Your mind keeps replaying the interaction, trying to understand something that does not quite fit. That subtle tension is what experienced mentors sometimes call spiritual friction, a quiet signal that something in the connection may not be aligned with your path. One practical habit that helps a chosen one develop discernment is observation. Instead of immediately judging a person, simply notice patterns. For example, after spending time with someone, ask yourself a simple question: do I feel lighter or heavier after this interaction? People who support your growth often leave you energized and inspired. On the other hand, when a connection constantly leaves you confused or emotionally tired, it may be a signal worth paying attention to. Many successful leaders and spiritual teachers use this exact practice to protect their focus and purpose. Think of it like maintaining a healthy environment. If a plant is placed in the right soil and sunlight, it grows naturally. But when the environment slowly becomes toxic, the plant begins to weaken, even if the change is not obvious at first. In the same way, a chosen one must protect the atmosphere around their life. Small emotional disturbances, repeated often enough, can quietly influence decisions, confidence, and clarity. And interestingly, when the peace of a chosen one begins to shift around someone, that is usually not the only signal. In many cases, another pattern soon appears, one where the connection itself still looks good on the outside, yet somehow leaves behind an unexpected trail of confusion. That is where the next realization begins to reveal itself. Every experienced mentor eventually tells the same truth to a chosen one. Not everything that looks good is meant to stay in your life. Some connections arrive wrapped in kindness, friendly conversations, and even moments of encouragement. On the surface, everything seems fine. In fact, if someone asked you to describe the person with the letter M, you might even say they seem supportive. Yet somehow, after spending time with them, a subtle fog settles over your thoughts. This kind of confusion rarely appears all at once. It grows slowly, almost quietly, until the chosen one begins to notice a strange pattern. Maybe a conversation starts positive, but somehow ends with you questioning your own decisions. Perhaps you shared an idea you were excited about, but afterward you found yourself doubting whether it was even a good idea at all. The words spoken may not seem harmful, yet the effect lingers longer than expected. A mentor once explained this using a simple analogy. Imagine drinking a glass of water that looks completely clear. You take a sip, and everything seems normal. But if a tiny drop of something toxic had been mixed in, you wouldn't notice it immediately. Over time, however, the effect would become obvious. In the same way, certain relationships appear harmless to a chosen one. But the emotional impact slowly begins to show in small ways: uncertainty, hesitation, or second-guessing. Many chosen ones ignore these early signals because they do not want to assume the worst about someone. That instinct is understandable. People with kind hearts tend to give others the benefit of the doubt. But wisdom is not the same as suspicion. Wisdom simply observes patterns. For instance, if a person consistently leaves you feeling less confident about your goals, it may not be accidental. There is a practical way a chosen one can test this without confrontation. Start paying attention to the emotional aftermath of conversations. Keep a small journal or note on your phone. After interacting with someone, especially the person whose name begins with M, write, a quick observation about how you feel afterward. Over time, patterns become easier to recognize. This small exercise has helped many people notice connections that were quietly affecting their clarity. Another interesting thing mentors often point out is that confusion tends to appear where clarity once existed. The chosen one might have felt certain about their direction for months, even years. Yet suddenly, after repeated interactions with someone, their thinking becomes cloudy. Goals that once felt exciting now feel uncertain. Plans that once seemed obvious now feel complicated. This does not always mean the other person intends harm. Sometimes people simply carry their own unresolved fears, insecurities, or doubts, and those emotions can spread into the atmosphere around them. But whether intentional or not, the effect on a chosen one can still be real. Just as a room filled with smoke affects everyone inside it, emotional confusion in a relationship can slowly influence the people closest to it. One of the greatest skills a chosen one can develop is the ability to separate appearances from outcomes. Someone might speak beautifully, appear supportive, and even seem loyal. Yet the real question is always the same. What happens to your clarity after you interact with them? If the result is repeated confusion, the connection deserves deeper reflection. Over time, many chosen ones discover that confusion rarely appears alone. It is often accompanied by another set of subtle signals, moments that seemed insignificant at first, but begin to make sense when viewed together. Small events, unusual timing, strange delays, or behaviors that once seemed random start forming a pattern. And that realization leads directly into the next discovery many chosen ones make on their journey. The possibility that God may have already been sending small signals long before the warning became clear. A seasoned mentor once told a group of young leaders something that stayed with them for years. Major problems rarely arrive without small warnings first. For a chosen one, life often works the same way. Before something becomes obvious, there are usually quiet signals scattered along the path. They may appear insignificant in the moment, but when you look back later, they form a pattern that suddenly makes sense. Many chosen ones remember moments like these only after the situation becomes clearer. Perhaps there was a conversation that ended strangely, a promise that was never fulfilled, or a plan that kept falling apart whenever a certain person was involved. At the time, it seemed like coincidence. But when those moments begin repeating around someone whose name starts with M, they can start to feel less random. Consider a simple example. Imagine you make plans to work on an important project. Everything is organized, your motivation is high, and the direction feels clear. But suddenly the person with the initial M becomes involved, and the process begins to shift. Meetings are delayed, communication becomes inconsistent, and small misunderstandings appear where there once was clarity. None of these moments seem dramatic on their own, yet together they create a pattern that quietly disrupts momentum. Mentors often compare these situations to early cracks forming in a wall. At first, the crack is small, barely noticeable. Most people ignore it, assuming it means nothing. But if the crack continues spreading, it eventually reveals a deeper structural problem underneath. For a chosen one, those small relational signals can work in a similar way. They are not meant to create fear. They exist to encourage awareness. Another example that many chosen ones recognize involves emotional energy. Have you ever noticed how some conversations leave you feeling inspired and focused, while others leave you strangely exhausted? Imagine talking with someone for just 15 minutes and suddenly feeling drained, even though the discussion seemed normal. That lingering fatigue can sometimes be one of the earliest signals that the connection deserves closer attention. One practical exercise many mentors recommend is learning to observe repeated patterns instead of isolated events. Anyone can have a bad day or make a mistake once. But when the same unusual behavior happens again and again around the same person, the pattern becomes meaningful. A chosen one learns to notice those repetitions quietly, without rushing to conclusions, but without ignoring them either. Sometimes the signals appear through timing as well. Plans that seemed promising suddenly collapse. Opportunities feel delayed. Momentum disappears whenever certain interactions happen. It is not always obvious why these things occur, but experienced chosen ones know that unusual patterns deserve reflection rather than dismissal. The interesting thing about these early signals is that they often arrive long before the chosen one realizes how deeply someone may have entered their personal space. What first appears as a small disturbance can slowly become a deeper connection that influences emotions, decisions, and even identity. And that is where the next realization begins to surface. Because sometimes the real issue is not only the signals themselves, but how much access someone has quietly gained to parts of a chosen one's inner world. At a certain point in life, every chosen one discovers a truth that many people learn too late. The most valuable things in life are often invisible. Peace, confidence, clarity, faith, and purpose. These are treasures that exist inside the heart and mind. And because they are invisible, it becomes easy to underestimate how carefully they should be protected. A mentor once explained it in a way that stayed with many listeners. He said that the mind and heart of a chosen one are like a private garden. In that garden grow ideas, dreams, convictions, and the quiet faith that keeps a person moving forward, even when life becomes difficult. But just like any garden, it matters who is allowed through the gate. Not every visitor understands how to treat what is growing there. Sometimes a connection begins very casually. Conversations are easy, trust develops naturally. The person, perhaps the one whose name begins with M, gradually becomes someone whose opinion matters. At first this feels harmless. In fact, it may even feel comforting to share thoughts, plans, and emotions with another person. But slowly, without realizing it, a chosen one may begin giving that person more influence than intended. Think about how easily this can happen. A chosen one might share a personal dream or future goal during a conversation. Maybe it is an idea for a business, a creative project, or a personal transformation they are working toward. If the response they receive introduces doubt or subtle criticism, the effect can linger longer than expected. Even a single comment like "Are you sure that will work?" can plant a seed of hesitation in the mind. This is not because the chosen one lacks strength. On the contrary, people with strong purpose often carry deep emotional sensitivity as well. So they care about the opinions of people they trust. That sensitivity can be a beautiful quality, but it also means that certain voices can influence their inner atmosphere more than they realize. One practical lesson many mentors teach is learning to protect what they call inner access. Not everyone needs to know every dream, every struggle, or every plan you are developing. Just as a gardener does not allow strangers to trample newly planted seeds, a chosen one sometimes needs to give certain ideas time to grow before sharing them widely. For example, imagine a young entrepreneur who has a powerful idea for a project. If they share it immediately with someone who carries doubt or insecurity, the conversation might weaken their motivation. But if they protect the idea long enough to build confidence and clarity, the same project can later become something strong and successful. The difference is not the idea, it is the environment in which the idea developed. Over time, many chosen ones realize that certain people gradually gain emotional access to their lives. Their opinions begin influencing decisions. Their approval begins affecting confidence. Their reactions start shaping how the chosen one sees themselves. When that happens with the wrong connection, the impact can quietly reshape the direction of someone's path. And this is where an even deeper realization begins to appear. Because sometimes the challenge is not just access itself, but the emotional attachment that slowly forms around that connection. One of the hardest lessons a chosen one eventually learns is that not every relationship is neutral. Some connections move you forward, inspire clarity, and strengthen your direction. Others, however, slowly pull your attention away from the path you were meant to walk. The shift is rarely dramatic at first. Instead, it happens quietly through emotional attachment that grows deeper over time. A wise mentor once explained it this way: purpose requires focus. Just like a runner cannot move at full speed while carrying unnecessary weight, a chosen one cannot fully pursue their calling while constantly navigating emotional turbulence. When a connection becomes emotionally consuming, especially with someone whose name begins with M, the mind can become preoccupied in ways that quietly drain energy. Think about how often emotional attachment reshapes daily routines. A chosen one may begin checking messages more frequently than usual, waiting for responses that suddenly feel very important. A conversation that should last 5 minutes stretches into an hour of overthinking. Decisions that were once clear now depend on someone else's reaction or approval. Little by little, the mental space that once belonged to personal growth becomes occupied by emotional uncertainty. There is nothing wrong with caring about people. In fact, empathy is one of the greatest strengths a chosen one can possess. But attachment becomes dangerous when it begins controlling focus. If someone's presence constantly influences your mood, your confidence, or your decisions, the connection may be occupying more space in your life than it should. Mentors often compare this situation to trying to read an important book in a noisy room. The message is still there, the wisdom is still available, but the distraction makes it harder to absorb. In the same way, a chosen one may still carry a powerful purpose. Yet emotional noise from the wrong connection can make it difficult to hear the inner guidance that once felt clear. One practical exercise that experienced mentors recommend is creating small moments of distance to regain perspective. For example, spending a few days focusing entirely on personal goals, work, or spiritual practices can help restore mental clarity. During that time, the chosen one may begin noticing how their energy shifts when certain interactions are reduced. Some people discover that their focus returns quickly once emotional noise fades. Their motivation improves, their thinking becomes sharper, and their confidence returns. These moments often reveal how much unseen weight a connection was placing on their mind. Interestingly, many chosen ones also begin noticing another pattern during these periods of reflection. The issue is not always just the attachment itself, it is also the subtle emotional effects that certain interactions leave behind. Small comments, slight shifts in tone, or quiet doubts introduced during conversations can slowly shape how someone feels about themselves. And that realization leads directly into the next important insight. Because sometimes the real challenge is not simply the relationship, but the emotional atmosphere that the relationship creates inside a chosen one's mind. A wise mentor once shared a powerful observation. The most influential people in your life are not always the ones who speak the loudest, but the ones who quietly shape how you see yourself. For a chosen one, this realization can be surprising, because sometimes the challenge is not something obvious like conflict or betrayal. Instead, it is the subtle emotional atmosphere that certain people create around you. Think about how emotions can spread between people almost invisibly. When someone enters a room with excitement and optimism, others often begin feeling that same energy. But the opposite can also happen. When someone carries insecurity, negativity, or constant doubt, those emotions can slowly influence the people around them. A chosen one who spends enough time in that environment may start questioning things they once believed in strongly. Imagine a situation where a chosen one shares a goal or vision they feel passionate about. Maybe it is a plan to change careers, start a project, or pursue something meaningful. If the person with the initial M responds with subtle skepticism, comments like "that sounds difficult," or "are you sure you're ready for that?" the conversation might appear harmless. But the effect of those words can echo long after the moment has passed. Many mentors explain this phenomenon using the idea of emotional residue. Just like smoke lingers in a room even after a fire has gone out, certain interactions leave behind emotional traces that remain in the mind. A chosen one may replay those conversations later in the day, wondering if the doubts they heard are actually true. Slowly, the internal confidence they once carried begins to feel less certain. One practical habit that experienced individuals develop is learning to notice how their self-perception changes after specific interactions. For example, a chosen one might ask themselves, "Do I feel more confident about my path after speaking with this person, or less?" This simple question can reveal patterns that were previously overlooked. Sometimes the change shows up in subtle ways. A chosen one who once approached challenges with excitement may suddenly feel hesitant. Decisions that used to feel natural begin requiring constant reassurance. Even spiritual practices or personal routines that once felt energizing may start feeling heavier. These shifts are rarely dramatic at first, but they can accumulate over time. Mentors often compare this situation to tuning a musical instrument. When the strings are properly tuned, the sound is clear and harmonious. But if someone slowly adjusts the tuning without you noticing, the instrument eventually produces a distorted tone. In the same way, the internal clarity of a chosen one can be gradually altered through repeated exposure to the wrong emotional influence. This does not always mean the other person intends harm. Sometimes people simply project their own fears or limitations onto others. But regardless of intention, the effect on the chosen one can still be significant. Recognizing that influence is often the first step toward reclaiming inner balance. And this realization opens the door to another important understanding. Because when clarity begins returning, many chosen ones discover that certain separations in life are not punishments at all, but forms of protection. There comes a moment in the life of many chosen ones when something unexpected begins to happen. The connection that once felt natural starts creating distance on its own. Conversations become less frequent, plans shift, or circumstances suddenly make it harder to stay as close as before. At first, this change can feel confusing or even painful. But experienced mentors often remind a chosen one that not every separation is a loss. Sometimes it is protection quietly unfolding. One mentor once described this moment using the image of a shepherd guiding sheep away from a dangerous path. The sheep might not understand why they are being redirected. From their perspective, the path ahead may look perfectly safe, but the shepherd sees the cliff long before they reach it. In the same way, the chosen one may experience unexpected distance from someone, perhaps the person whose name begins with M, without immediately understanding the deeper reason behind it. Many people instinctively resist these moments of separation. After all, relationships bring familiarity, and familiarity feels comfortable. A chosen one might ask themselves questions like, "Did I do something wrong? Or why is this connection suddenly changing?" But sometimes the shift has nothing to do with failure. It may simply be the natural result of two paths moving in different directions. Think about how growth works in other areas of life. A student who leaves school eventually moves beyond the environment where they once spent every day. An athlete outgrows certain training routines as their skills develop. In the same way, a chosen one sometimes moves beyond connections that no longer support the direction their life is taking. Another helpful way to understand this is through the idea of space for growth. Imagine a tree planted too close to another tree. At first, both grow normally. But as time passes, their branches begin competing for the same sunlight. One tree must eventually create distance or risk stunting its growth. For a chosen one, certain relationships may unintentionally create that same kind of competition for emotional and mental space. Mentors often suggest that when distance begins appearing naturally in a connection, the best response is not immediate resistance, but thoughtful observation. Ask simple questions. What has changed? How do I feel during this space? Do I feel more clarity or more confusion? Many chosen ones discover that when the distance settles, their thoughts begin to organize themselves again. Sometimes the chosen one notices that their motivation returns, their focus improves, and the emotional noise they once felt begins to fade. Goals that seemed complicated suddenly feel possible again. This shift does not necessarily mean someone was a bad person. It simply reveals that the connection may not have been aligned with the direction the chosen one was meant to follow. Interestingly, moments of separation often reveal something else as well. Once the emotional distance grows, a chosen one begins seeing certain patterns more clearly than before. Actions, conversations, and influences that once seemed normal start appearing in a new light. And that realization leads directly into the next insight, because sometimes the deepest challenge was not the connection itself, but the confusion between affection and true alignment. One of the most delicate lessons a chosen one learns is that affection and alignment are not the same thing. A connection can feel warm, familiar, even meaningful, and still not be meant to walk alongside your destiny. Many chosen ones discover this only after they have invested time, energy, and emotional space into someone who seemed right at first. Perhaps even the person whose name begins with M. A seasoned mentor once explained it with a simple example. Imagine boarding a train because you enjoy the company of someone sitting inside it. The conversation is pleasant, the environment feels comfortable, and everything seems fine. But if the train is heading in the wrong direction, the comfort of the moment cannot change the destination. For a chosen one, recognizing this difference between affection and alignment can become one of the most important forms of wisdom. Its realization is often difficult because people with purpose tend to have generous hearts. They see potential in others, they believe in growth, and they want to support the people around them. That generosity is a strength, but it can also make it easier for a chosen one to overlook signs that the relationship itself may not support the path they are meant to walk. Sometimes affection creates a sense of loyalty that keeps someone in a connection longer than necessary. A chosen one might think, "This person has been kind to me, or we have shared important moments together. Those memories are real and meaningful." Yet the deeper question remains, is this relationship helping me grow into the person I am meant to become? Mentors often encourage chosen ones to examine the direction of their relationships rather than just the emotions inside them. For example, after spending time with someone, ask yourself whether the connection encourages clarity, discipline, and faith, or whether it introduces hesitation, distraction, and uncertainty. Over time, these patterns reveal more truth than surface-level affection ever could. A practical exercise that many people find helpful is imagining their life 5 years into the future. Picture the direction you hope to be moving toward, the goals you want to accomplish, the character you want to develop, the life you hope to build. Then ask a simple question: does this relationship help move me toward that future? or does it slowly pull me away from it? For a chosen one, this reflection can bring surprising clarity. Another powerful sign appears when the relationship begins affecting your sense of peace. A connection that is truly aligned often brings encouragement and stability, even during difficult moments. But when affection masks misalignment, the chosen one may feel torn between caring for the person and protecting their own direction. It is important to remember that recognizing this difference does not require anger or blame. Not every connection that ends was meant to harm you. Some people simply arrive during certain seasons of life and leave when that season changes. The wisdom lies in recognizing when the path ahead requires a different environment. And once a chosen one begins seeing that difference clearly, something interesting happens. The focus slowly shifts away from what is being left behind and toward what might be waiting ahead. Because often when one connection releases its hold, space begins opening for something far greater. That realization leads directly into the final insight many chosen ones eventually discover, that when a warning appears in life, it is often because something better is already being prepared on the horizon. A mentor once shared a thought that many chosen ones remember for the rest of their lives. Warnings are rarely about taking something away. They are usually about preparing space for something better. At first, this idea can feel difficult to accept. When a connection becomes uncertain or begins fading, especially with someone whose name begins with M, a chosen one may feel confusion or even loss. Time often reveals that these moments were not obstacles, but redirections. Think about how life naturally creates room for new opportunities. A person cannot step into a new season while still standing firmly in the old one. Just like a traveler cannot board a new train while holding on to the previous platform, a chosen one sometimes has to release certain connections in order to move forward with clarity. What initially feels like separation can later become the exact turning point that allowed growth to happen. Many mentors use the analogy of a garden to explain this process. A gardener occasionally removes weeds, not because they hate the plants growing there, but because those weeds consume the nutrients meant for the flowers. In the same way, when certain influences leave the life of a chosen one, it is often because something more meaningful is ready to grow. The space created by that change allows new ideas, relationships, and opportunities to develop without interference. For example, imagine someone who spent months feeling distracted by a complicated connection. Their attention was divided, their emotions were constantly shifting, and their focus on personal goals slowly weakened. But once that connection naturally fades, something surprising happens. The chosen one suddenly feels lighter. Projects that once seemed difficult begin moving forward again. Creativity returns, motivation grows, and the mind becomes clear. These moments often reveal how much emotional energy had been quietly tied to the relationship. When that energy returns to its rightful place, the chosen one can finally invest it into the future again. Many people describe this experience as feeling like waking up after a long mental fog. The direction that once seemed uncertain begins making sense again. Another important lesson appears during this stage. A warning does not mean the future will be empty. In fact, quite the opposite is usually true. History is full of stories where individuals thought they had lost something important, only to discover later that the separation allowed them to meet new mentors, build stronger partnerships, or pursue opportunities they would have otherwise missed. A chosen one who understands this principle begins responding to life's warnings differently. Instead of reacting with fear, they observe with patience. Instead of clinging to confusion, they choose clarity. Over time, this mindset transforms how they approach relationships, decisions, and personal growth. Many mentors encourage a simple reflection exercise during moments like this. Take a quiet evening and write down 3 things: the goals you feel called to pursue, the type of environment that helps you thrive, and the qualities of people who bring out the best in you. When a chosen one compares these reflections with their current relationships, it often becomes clear which connections support the journey and which ones quietly hold it back. Eventually, the bigger picture begins to appear. What once felt like a mysterious warning about someone, perhaps the person with the initial M, reveals itself as part of a larger process guiding the chosen one toward alignment. Life begins organizing itself around purpose again, and the distractions that once created confusion slowly lose their influence. And when a chosen one reaches this point, something remarkable tends to happen. Instead of focusing on the uncertainty that once existed, they begin recognizing the quiet ways their path is being guided forward. Opportunities appear more naturally. New relationships bring encouragement instead of doubt. Decisions feel clearer, and peace returns to the center of their life. This is often the moment when a chosen one realizes that the warning they once questioned was never meant to create fear. It was meant to awaken awareness, restore clarity, and open the door to the next chapter waiting ahead. Chosen one, sometimes the greatest protection does not come through a dramatic miracle, but through quiet awareness. If something in this message made you pause and reflect about the person with the letter M, don't ignore that feeling. Take it to prayer, observe the patterns in your life, and protect the peace that was placed inside you. A chosen one was never meant to live in constant confusion, but in clarity, purpose, and spiritual strength. Now take a moment and ask yourself honestly, who in your life changes your peace when they enter the room? Peace. Awareness is the first step toward wisdom. If this message spoke to your spirit, comment "I'm in" below, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notifications so you don't miss the next message meant for every chosen one. Walking their path with discernment.